I have some really serious information I came across. I've been telling you guys for ages to pay attention to the fact that there's no real, actual evidence to prove that a genocide is happening in Xinjiang. Today, I'm here to tell you that although there isn't a genocide going on right now, I found a clear evidence, a clear desire, a clear hope that genocide does happen in Xinjiang. This genocide, however, is a little bit different than what anybody expected. The people involved, the way it plays out is very different and ironic in many ways. And before I explain exactly what I'm trying to say here, let me set this up for you guys. Let me tell you how I got into a conversation that led to the clearest admission of what a certain group of people is up to, what they hope to accomplish. So, first of all, there's a guy named Sabor Ahmad. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And so what he did was he made a post, a tweet, and announced that he was going to release an article on me, exposing me as a CCP agent. This guy runs some sort of an overseas Uyghur advocacy group. To give you an idea about some of the stuff him and his group says, here he is with his friend talking about their message to the Chinese people. And note, it's to the Chinese people, not the Chinese government. This is going to become more and more important as you go along, and we put the pieces together here. So let's play the video.
And yes, we are mobilizing, and this is our message. This is our threat, our legal threat to the Chinese.
Thank you so much, brother.
Let me tell them right now. I know they're watching me.
Yes, they're watching.
You should be quaking. You should be shaking, because we are going to expose you. We are going to humiliate you. We are going to discombobulate you. We are going to bedazzle the Chinese people and the Muslim soldiers here that are ready. And I mean that in the metaphorical sense.
Wow. Well, I'm certainly bedazzled, and I'm not even their target Chinese audience. But you notice how they set this up beautifully with read between the lines for any of the more, let's say, interesting folks that may be part of their groups. This is our threat. Legal, of course. Of course, that's what we mean. And the Muslim soldiers that are here are ready. Metaphorically speaking, of course, that's what we mean. You guys may think I'm reading into this too much. He did go on to say, well, we mean in terms of exposing the truth. But nevertheless, we still need to keep this in mind for what you're about to see. Everything's going to tie in together by the end of this talk. Anyways, firstly, back to the incoming article. These are no big deals. I've had people write articles about me, and it's kind of fun, actually, because I like seeing the twists and turns they try to do to figure out some sort of an angle on me. I had a lot of fun with the Al Jazeera report, the South China Morning Post. I'm looking forward to the other ones coming up. The ones that were written in German and French, because there was too much of an issue to translate and stuff like that, I left those ones. But anyway, so this is going to be hopefully an English article, because I'm going to really enjoy it. So I simply responded to, in a very genuine way, thank you. I hope it leads some of your audience to my content, followed by a handshake, because I thought this was a good opportunity for him to expose his audience to my work. I'm confident that it stands on its own, and I'm happy for people who don't agree with me to find their way over to my channel. But he didn't really like this reply, and he kept going after me with new retweets and tagging me over and over, and suddenly it hit me. After someone writes a report on me, usually, and this has happened a few times, they refuse to answer any questions from me afterwards or defend anything they said. They just move on, and it's done. But here, these guys are actually interacting with me, and I thought that after they finish the article, they're just going to be like, okay, no, we obviously can't defend this. So I wanted to simultaneously prove that I don't have anything to hide, no matter what someone says about me, but also prove that this guy was full of shit at the same time. So I tagged him and a bunch of his friends further down in this thread that I made, who seemed to be involved with him and were laying in with me as well and promoting this upcoming article. So I tweeted out, hey, I have an awesome proposition for you, Sabora. I love your confidence, and I have a problem. Every time someone writes an article about me, they never dare accept a follow-up interview or a debate with me. So I've got a great idea. Even without seeing your article, even without knowing what you wrote about me, even without knowing what you've exposed, I extend an invite to you on my show to debate and defend your article. I'll even tie one hand behind my back if you need. Do you accept? We're waiting. So, I mean, you guys, I deliberately acted a bit arrogant here because I wanted to goad him into accepting, and I had low hopes that he actually would. But if he was going to reject, I got to be honest, I wanted him to leave feeling humiliated. So you can say I was being an asshole here, but whatever, I'm fine with that. So then I go on to say, As fanboys of Sabor's upcoming article, I highly recommend you encourage him to accept this offer. And then those were the two main friends. There's this one guy, Hat Zordis is his tag, and then the other one is Mohammed. And so I said, refusing to do so may risk leading people to believe that you're fully aware how full of shit you are instead of simply being innocently ignorant. Again, I know I'm being a bit of an asshole here. They're clearly doing a hit piece on me, and I'm laying it on because most of the time, like I said, these folks run away like cowards afterwards. So this is my chance to get it all in on these guys who were silly enough to interact with me beforehand. But, at first he didn't accept. He was kind of just still doing all this stuff. And then finally he accepted, not in English. So I missed it initially. And but then he reaffirmed with a retweet that he would come on my show to defend his article. And then he also laid into me for not recognizing non-English words to prove that I don't really understand Muslim Uyghurs. So I went on to say, looking forward to it. Since roasting someone by saying something in a language that's not native to them is fair game, I'll add my own roast that proves you don't understand China, unless you're replying 2 minutes, because I know you're online. And then I put this little insult down here, and you guys can, if you know what that is. I deliberately did it in Pinyin so he couldn't translate it, and I gave him 2 minutes so he couldn't just try to find some Chinese person to help him. But basically, it's an insult, a small insult. Anyway, so after this point, we had a bunch of exchanges because he continually kept tagging me over and over, and I didn't respond to all of it. But I liked some of the other replies. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't, whatever. So I liked this one that was a reply to him. He said, there's a pattern that these Christian evangelicals and pro-U.S. Islamic terror puppets have in common. They're extremely comfortable with lying and deceiving. Don't these guys think about the consequences, when they get to the special place? So whatever. In the absence of me interacting enough with his tweets, he started policing my likes, and he said, strange that this guy thinks I'm some sort of a pro-U.S. Islamic terror puppet, and Daniel Dumbrell likes that tweet. This shows that these CCP shills parrot their master's narrative, and that Muslims talking about any Muslims talking about East Turkestan are terrorists. So this is going to start to get a little bit more interesting. He's right, though. I don't have enough information about him to necessarily say that he does endorse, for example, terrorist groups like the ETIM, who the U.S. took off of the terrorist list, indicating a possible U.S. support that's going to begin here for these groups. I have no idea. So what I did was I posted a video. I used it as an opportunity of a Uyghur terrorist in Syria threatening to kill all the Chinese people who didn't leave. And this is that video. Take a look.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
So after tweeting that out in a reply, I asked him, I said, will you publicly denounce ETIM and TIP? Will you publicly call on the U.S. to put ETIM back onto the terrorist org list as soon as possible? Now, what I want to say is never ask just a random Muslim this question. This is actually a very rude thing to do. But I want to give you some context here. I'm not just asking a Muslim this, because it's incredibly insulting in the U.S. when American politicians were asking just ordinary Muslims to condemn terrorist attacks, and if they didn't, people would be suspicious of them. It is absolutely the wrong thing to do. However, this guy poses with East Turkestan flags. This guy is a separatist. This guy is supporting basically all of the same things without explicitly talking about the killing part as this guy. So that's why I wanted to put this out there and see, well, what's your position on these guys now that we're on this topic? So just to give you guys some context about that. I was actually ready to apologize too, and if I was wrong, and he says, yeah, no, of course I don't support these guys at all. But he didn't say anything about them. He just replied and said, "This one I'll address one-to-one. You can't escape the fact that you like to tweet which called me a terrorist first and then asked if I'd condemn a particular group. I'll put you in your place, you little CCP weasel." So up until now, he still hasn't addressed this issue, just basically deflected. Again, not enough to say anything on its own, but this is all going to kind of wrap up together, and I'll show you, because this is actually where it gets really interesting. A guy who he supports, a guy that he's aligned with, an old pal of mine, Arslan Hidayat, who is a very prominent, very loud Xinjiang voice, separatist activist, whatever you want to call him. I interviewed him on my channel also. You've seen him, some of you have seen that interview. He joined the conversation under my video reply and said the following: "There's nothing wrong with this video. He's warning the people of China who have illegally settled and occupied East Turkestan to leave or face the consequences. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is Uyghurs currently don't have the capacity to physically defend or take." And I think there was a second tweet. But anyways, I know his position on this. There's a bunch of stuff that needs to be broken down about this, because this is not a situation like Israel where people are being pushed off their lands. There were a lot of Chinese people who went to new farming communities, like Shiheze is one place. They didn't get any land. They didn't get any local land like the Uyghur people. But anyways, that's a whole different topic, and maybe I'll cover that in something else. So I just responded. I said, "To be fair, Arslan, I wouldn't have asked you that question, as I already know how you feel on this topic. Still appreciate your input, though." And I retweeted a summary that I made from an interview he had with my friend Carl Zah, where he said, basically, what to do with the non-Uyghurs. He says, "If you won't leave, maybe you can stay if you bow down to us." And he used those words, bow down. Those were his words. But non-Uyghurs, for example, Han, Hui, Mongol, whatever, won't get a vote. And we may consider exiling them out. And he said, "Some separatists, of course, suggest a different kind of final solution." And you can guess what that is. So he didn't want to say it, but by endorsing the video in this thread, it brings a little bit more context to what he meant by that final solution. So now, in regards to this video, I decided to follow up because he had a bunch of other replies, and I said, okay, let me ask for a bit of clarification here. So I asked Arslan, I said, as you're endorsing this message that he'd come back and kill everyone, could you let me know if he would also be looking to kill the other ethnic minority groups that have been here for just as long as well? He said, well, not kill everyone. Non-combatants are to be spared. Hypothetically, all other ethnic Turkic minorities are part of East Turkestan. The rest would need to be judged on a case-by-case basis. So basically, creating an ethno-state. Basically, what China's being accused of, they will actually do in reverse. So I said, Mongols potentially could be killed by someone like him, depending on the result of this case-by-case analysis. And he said, not just Mongols, even Uyghurs who fight on the side of the CCP would be seen as the enemy. I have to stress, non-combatants, example, i.e. women, children, elderly, any men refraining from fighting, are not to be touched. Before we can get into that, we need to close the camps. That's another issue in terms of those vocational training centers are already being closed. I'm not going to get into that right now. I said, I'm not talking about fighting. I'm talking about Mongol, Han, for example, in the non-Uyghur majority areas of Xinjiang. If they refuse to leave, will they be killed, according to the guy you endorsed? And he said, they will be made to leave with force if necessary, if they are not native to that land. I said, would it be fair to say something similar to what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, some sort of same kind of a general concept? I use this because actually there's a lot of research on the fact that many overseas Uyghur activists use Zionism and Israel as an example of what they'd like to accomplish in Xinjiang. I'll share the article for you here. I'll talk about it a little bit more further down. So anyways, he says, well, no, Jews and Arabs both belong in Palestine. What doesn't belong is Zionism. Okay, got it. So I said, on that premise, will you give north of the Tian Shan Mountains to the Mongols since they were there before the Uyghurs? And he said, the future Uyghur authorities will need to deal with the specifics of each case. And I said, wait, your logic regarding the need to give land back to its native inhabitants requires, in order for you to remain consistent with what you're willing to say out loud, that north of the Tian Shan Mountains should be given to the Mongols, and this should not even be up to a Uyghur authority. And he said, if a future Uyghur authority determines that to be the case, then I have no objections. And I said, why does a Uyghur authority have any authority over a region they are not native to, if your whole argument is that they should be given authority over areas that they are native to? You know, I want to stress something here. I don't like using this argument about who was there first, you know, and focusing on the fact that Mongolian people were there before them, or in some areas that even Han were there 1,000 years before the Uyghurs arrived, and when the Uyghurs arrived, absorbed them into their population, because I think it's irrelevant. China created a society here where everyone can live together and coexist peacefully. They are not trying to create a single culture, a single ethno-state, like many accuse them of. On the contrary, this is exactly what the Uyghur groups you're cheering on want to do, and you can see that from what Arslan is saying here. I received no answer for this, but Arslan started a new conversation on a thread responding to something else Sabor posted about me. So I interjected into the conversation and said this. So first of all, he was replying to Sabor and said, "Oh, now you get it." I said, "Arslan, could you help a wider audience also understand by answering this question? From the surface, there seems to be a major critical inconsistency with your logic. I'm asking with an honest, genuine interest in your answer. I promise you that." And he responded, "And I'm saying there's a bigger fish to fry. The Mongols are least of my concern. My people are dying, and you want me to get into a trivial hypotheticals. Nobody's dying, guys. This is the kind of language he uses. Anyways, whatever. I said, no hypotheticals required. Your argument is that Uyghurs should gain authority over areas they are native to. Why then are you advocating that they take authority over areas where Mongols were there before them and gain the right to decide their fate? Inconsistent logic. Why?" I got no responses to these. Sabor continued to make new tweets tagging me, and I tried to encourage him to respond to Arslan, who is someone he's very closely aligned with. So his new post, there are tons like this. It's just like over and over, nonstop. This guy is really obsessed. So he says, Daniel Dumbrell tries to win over Muslims, but his language betrays he holds the same views on us as the CCP. First, assume a regular Muslim is a terrorist, then ask questions to see if they support a particular group. Your act has now been exposed. I said, please help expose me by helping Arslan answer this question. Based on your confidence, you should have no problem. Thank you in advance. No answer. No answer. He doesn't want to answer that. He doesn't want to talk about ETIM. Sabor, if you're watching this, the next time you start tagging me, do us all a favor. Prove to us that you're honest, that you have integrity, and the truth is on your side, and explain this hypocrisy to us. I don't care about any other kind of meltdown you're interested in having while mucking up my notifications again. And hey, if you want to keep attributing any negative comments you've received on posts about me from critics as also being representative of my opinion, using your own logic, combined with your inability to talk about ETIM directly, considering the comments from your followers saying absolutely they follow the ETIM and that they're epic, we now know your position on ETIM. Once again, using your own logic with additional evidence. So anyways, in and around this point, Sabor started talking about his article coming out about me in more uncertain terms. You know, in the beginning it went out, it was framed as coming out very soon to... Not really sure now. I'll get around to it when I get around to it. And now he's trying to change the topic of the debate. So I'm not sure if any of this is going to happen anymore. But these set of exchanges that he sparked revealed some really valuable things. I think you may probably see some Uyghur activists distance themselves from Arslan. I think this has happened before as well. Not because they don't agree with him, but because he's saying the quiet bits out loud. You know, the fact is the overseas Uyghur separatists celebrated the removal of ETIM off of the terror organizations list in the U.S. I mean, Voice of America even, you know, the CIA propaganda outlet that's on their side even reported on that. And from this point forward, you guys also pay attention to how many of the U.S. government NGO-funded Uyghur activists pose with the East Turkestan flag flying behind them or stuck to their wall. They're not interested in improving the human rights condition in China. Their motive is to claim a land that they never had exclusive claim over. They are separatists taking advantage of your gullibility to believe this genocide narrative in order to further their personal geopolitical goals of their own. They have weaponized your compassion in order to realize a goal which will lead to the things you think are happening now to actually happen under the hands of the people that you're propping up. You know, there's a separate topic I'm going to have to make a video about, which is what are the true grievances? Obviously, there's the motive of money, funding, power, control, and relation wanting to rule over what they call East Turkestan. And, you know, those are, of course, major factors. But some people have legitimate issues. The problem is is even the most superficial societal issues can be weaponized to create divides and conflicts. I've spoken to you all about how what the U.S. did in my mother's country of Guyana before creating a racial war between the people of African and Indian descent in order to achieve America's geopolitical goals. And all that took was stoking an underlying superficial problem. Well, at least, superficial when measured up against the need for an all-out race war. I also have a Muslim friend in Egypt who actually joined Al-Qaeda when he was younger during a dark period of his life. And he was supposed to be deployed to Iraq. Luckily, he managed to pull himself out of this and reform himself. But he said that Al-Qaeda first tried to recruit in Iraq just on the basis of religion alone. But they weren't really making any headway. So they later changed to exploiting sectarian divides, which turned out to be far more effective. And he said in that regard, what America does around the world to divide and conquer is no different than these kinds of terrorist organizations. They are the same. They basically operate the same. And so it's no surprise that a lot of people call the U.S. government one of the largest terrorist organizations in the world. But I want to take a quick step back here. Let's take a step back and keep something in mind. When I'm talking about the overseas Uyghur community, I'm talking about the anti-China pro-separatist groups. There are pro-China Uyghurs overseas, but it's extremely dangerous for them to speak up. I'm sure you can tell by the people who I'm interacting with here. There was one Uyghur girl in Germany who was pretty frustrated by the cotton sanctions and lies about Xinjiang because she knows full well there are many Uyghur families who have small plots of land where they grow their own cotton and earn a living from it. Well, that video expressing her unhappiness, discontent, whatever you want to call it, she took it down. She took it off of YouTube. And on her Bilibili account, she explained that she was receiving serious threats and her address was exposed online. A Uyghur friend in Pakistan has also had his Twitter account suspended over and over again and targeted. You're not hearing pro-overseas Uyghur voices, not because they don't exist, but because the groups that want to keep them quiet are very, very dangerous. To get a wider sense of how certain you can be that there are overseas Uyghur terrorist groups, especially fighting in Syria and Idlib with ISIS, waiting for an opportunity to attack China or its overseas infrastructure. Keep an eye out for that, guys. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. Take a look at how they're even training child soldiers. A friend from Egypt took a look at this video with me, the same one I was talking about earlier, and he had contact with ETIM before, and he told me this video doesn't even show a fraction of what's going on. These kids are trained in bomb making, detonation, and all kinds of other, terrorist activities. Let's take a look.
The video also featured young Uyghur school children shouting threats to the Chinese government.
خلافات زمندا تيارلق قلواتمز ان شاء الله تيارلقمزن في التراب او توحيد بايرقنين تركستان شرق تركستان قدايمز تكبير بسم الله
Yaşlanğan gözler, boğulğan sözler, izzette bugün gamlengen yüzler. Yaşlanğan gözler, boğulğan sözler, izzette bugün gamlengen yüzler. Her yerde tekbir, olğaçqa sabır, titremekte tağut.
هنا نحيا بين أهلنا وإخواننا من المهاجرين والأنصار تجمعنا بهم رابطة الدين التي هي أقوى من رابطة.
I mean, that's some pretty serious stuff going on there, guys. Now, what's important to note that it's not only these anti-China overseas Uyghur communities trying to whitewash these terrorists. It's Western scholars as well. I read a book from one of them, and it was remarkable, to say the least. I don't know what's the right word to use for it. So this is who I found. I first found out about Sean Roberts from a thread he wrote that seemed to really be whitewashing terrorism. And he said, hey, if you want to learn more, here's my book. So I replied to him. I said, where can I buy a copy? I said, how do you feel about, because he kept saying ETM isn't really a real threat to China. So I posted that video of an ETIM member threatening to kill Chinese people. And I said, well, because I'm curious how he reconciles this. I said, well, how do you feel about ETIM being delisted as a terrorist organization, making fundraising easier, especially considering America's history of supporting terrorists for geopolitical goals, and considering Uyghur militants saying they want to kill all Chinese people? He never responded to any of my questions or this question. And oddly, he did respond to responses to me, replies under my question. So for sure, he saw my message. And I thought might question was pretty reasonable and respectful. I even asked where I could get his book. But anyways, I ended up purchasing his book on Amazon Kindle. I started going through it, and I found some really remarkable things. So I just was blown away. So I made a thread of my own at this point. And I knew he wasn't going to respond, but I just wanted to put this out there for people to see. And I first, what I did was I retweeted the tweet that he replied to, which was under my original reply. So knowing, like, letting him know, buddy, I know you saw my tweet. So I said, his original tweet was, "This is where the ideological circle meets. Extreme Trumpists and extreme tanky Xinjiang denialists alike share an aversion to facts, evidence, science, and apparently reading. Why take the time to investigate when you have an 8chan or a Patreon bubble to tell you the truth?" This guy, like, listen to him. I bought his book, and this is how he's talking about us. So I responded to that, and I said, I didn't go to an 8chan bubble asking this question. I came to you asking a respectful question. Instead of answering me, you're going after other folks who did reply to me, and with ad hominem attacks, no less. Very unprofessional and telling. Then I go on to say, in the absence of being able to understand your thought process, and after digging into your book myself, I have to say, it reads slightly less awkward than PBS dressing up Abu Muhammad al-Jalani in a suit and getting him to promise he isn't a baddie anymore. That really happened. It was so awkward. I said, well, maybe not the part where after going on for ages about the terrible reality of Uyghur kids learning Mandarin in China, you then go on to basically say, sure, Uyghur kids are training with terrorists in Syria, but they have awesome holiday parties. Like, what in the... Like, this is what he was saying. In his book, he was talking about, yeah, it just seems like a really nice community. They have, like, holiday parties. It seems kind of fun, this kind of language. After spending pages and pages talking about the horror of Uyghur kids in China learning Mandarin. Like, what? I don't know what to say. Anyway, so I continue on. Not surprised that Timothy Gross showed up in your book because, hey, sure, Uyghur children are being trained with guns by terrorists in Syria, but at least they aren't being culturally genocided with teeth-brushing campaigns in China. Am I right? So Timothy Gross, he's a real special kid. He does all kinds of he does actually some really deep research. The problem is how he translates that research that he finds. He goes deep into Chinese data. He could have been a really good researcher, but unfortunately he's just using his ability to look through data to push this dishonest narrative. Let me show you an example of one of his translations. So he grabs a picture of somebody teaching a kid to brush their teeth in a teeth brushing campaign. I think it was part and parcel with their poverty alleviation and training, all this kind of stuff across all of China. And he had an issue with the Chinese government teaching Uyghur kids how to brush their teeth. He said, colonization is not just about erasing and redefining territories and cultures. It's about disciplining individual bodies. A member of the Fang Huiju team directs a small child on how to brush his teeth correctly. Like, what the heck? When I first learned about this Timothy Gross guy, I actually sent him I laid into him later on, but I sent him a very respectful message. I said, hey, listen, do you want to come on my show and talk about your data, talk about what you're discovering? He went down into a meltdown. He's like, no, of course not. And he says, I have a deep interest in the issue of, I can't remember what it was about mixing of cultures. And I even said to him, I said, hey, listen, that's actually awesome. We can talk about that too, because I'm mixed race. And that's a topic I've always thought about as well. And then he descended into, you can't even speak Chinese. Do you want to learn how to say butterfly? Repeat after me, hu die. And he stretched it out in this long, weird pinyin pronunciation. It wasn't even actual pinyin. But anyways, this is what this community of intellects and researchers and professors looks like and sounds like. Continuing on with this thread, here is a deeper dive into Sean's problematic apologist's guide for Uyghur terrorism position, suspiciously published in a book shortly after ETIM was removed from the U.S. state list of terrorist organizations. You guys can guess what's slowly but surely coming next. So, yeah, that was talking about his original thread, which was basically whitewashing Uyghur terrorism, which looks awfully familiar. if you look back over history, obviously, you remember when Osama bin Laden was celebrated as a brave freedom fighter that just coincidentally was fighting against America's rival. We really love terrorists when they can do something for the West, eh? And you can only imagine how all over ETIM the U.S. is now, who's frantically trying to derail China, so much so that they even have a $300 million anti-China propaganda fund on the go. Just think about this. Think about how narratives are controlled. They had, for example, they had way more people fooled about the Israel situation before as well. Aside from having such a tight grip over the narrative, where often, before it would have been political or professional suicide to empathize with the Palestinians too much. Suddenly now that narrative, they've completely lost control of it. And people have woken up and said, hang on a sec here. Why are so many Palestinian kids dying every time there's a conflict? How come we didn't think about the context of them being pushed off of their lands into smaller and smaller, impoverished areas with no clean running water, living in highly concentrated neighborhoods, and just saying to yourself, after a missile kills a few dozen kids, well, it's because Hamas put them there, of course. Now you're starting to look at this more critically. That's a topic, obviously, I wasn't planning on getting into now, but on that topic, it's probably worth mentioning in a side note that one of the guys who showed up, promoting this upcoming article on me, and who's associated with Sabora, a guy named Hamza, had this to say about China. Why haven't any nations legally invaded northwest China? The Chinese government's oppression of the Uyghurs is horrifying. I'm sure international laws allow military interventions based on humanitarian grounds. Temporal power doesn't last. Hell is the abode for such oppressors. However, let's take a look at what he has to say about the Palestinians. Let's see what he has to say about their struggle. Hamza, how do you feel about them? Our sadness has also been met with anger and anguish as our brothers and sisters in Palestine have been terrorized and oppressed by an evil, lying, and fascist government. Please keep them and all of the oppressed people around the world in your prayers. All of a sudden, we don't need an invasion anymore. Prayers will suffice. The Muslims who are being bombed and killed and displaced from their lands and discriminated against with institutionalized racism and racist laws with the assistance of U.S. funding and U.S. military equipment suddenly require a more hands-off approach. It doesn't matter that in 1 week of fighting, we have more hard evidence about the atrocities than over a year of millions of dollars of funding this Xinjiang narrative. That doesn't matter here. Prayers are still going to be enough, It doesn't bode well for selling this idea that these people aren't supporters of U.S. terrorism when suddenly they'll even go soft on atrocities against their own Muslim people if it's got America's fingerprint on it. Keep in mind here, guys like these don't love America. And in fact, many of them hate America. They just see an opportunity to use you to accomplish what they want. You may find that their anti kind of U.S. rhetoric has eased up a bit in many categories to stay buddy-buddy with you. But if you think they're still going to be your best buds after they get what they want, you're sadly mistaken yet again. This isn't your first rodeo supporting terror groups. They'll especially show you how serious they are after they've accomplished what they want and you've outlived your usefulness, and especially if you start meddling in their internal affairs, which of course you will, especially if they try to nationalize their resources and keep it away from the hands of your corporate powers. I'm not going to expand into this more. There are many history lessons out there that you can learn from and see that this isn't just an imaginary scenario. It's something that happens over and over again. But going back to the Israel problem, it's worth noting that, as a quick side note, many overseas Uyghurs look to Israel and Zionism as their ideal model for what they want to accomplish in Xinjiang. This is also why there might be a bit of a shared respect and additional flexibility, even though, for Israel, even though they're abusing fellow Muslims. And as I said earlier, I'll share the article on that topic. You guys should be able to see right through this. But I decided to lay my findings from this conversation out into a new thread, which I'm going to go through with you now. So I start with retweeting the final unanswered question and added screenshots of the entire conversation, just in case Arslan deletes it. And I said, please don't attack Arslan. He's at least honest enough to answer these questions, but it's really important you understand this. You know, sometimes when I retweet people, there's a bunch of people that jump on them, and I don't want that to happen. Arslan, he didn't answer my last question, but he's still engaged, and I respect that. So I said, no matter how you feel about the CCP, separatists like this, if successful, with your support, will be the ones committing real genocide. I mean, he said it pretty much clearly. The U.S. knows this as well. Delisting ETIM as a terror org was an essential first step to allow them to fundraise and recruit. The second step is to drive up unemployment in Xinjiang via sanctions to make recruitment easier. This is exactly how al-Qaeda benefited from Iraq's instability. This is something that my friend, who I said from Egypt, joined al-Qaeda, said that after the U.S. kind of destroyed Iraq, there was a high level of unemployment, especially in the army security forces. So it was a dream come true for Al-Qaeda, because not only could they exploit the high unemployment, they had people who were already battle trained. And my friend said even the U.S. admitted that this is exactly what happened. Okay, so I go on and say, in poorer countries, sanctions very deliberately cause death, suffering, and instability to accomplish America's geopolitical goals. Listen to this Biden aide admit sanctions purposefully are purposefully designed to destroy economies and raise unemployment. These are global war criminals. So here we go. There's this video, and let me play that for you now.
For them, it wasn't just about oil. It was also about their ability to diversify their economy. We started targeting, for instance, automobiles in Iran in June of 2013 to be able to go after other aspects of their national industry and to go after things like unemployment, to try and help drive that up and make things a little bit more sticky.
Right. Sure. Okay, so I think it was Venezuela who's actually using this statement as evidence of war crimes, the U.S. war crimes against countries in, I don't know if it's the International Criminal Court, but anyways, that's a little bit too far off topic. You get the point. I then go on to say, when eliminating a people, propaganda and fear-mongering about the target group has always come in handy. We don't see China doing that against the Uyghurs. However, your incessant China fear-mongering and East Turkestan leadership words are prepping you. And so I shared Rabia Kadir, the U.S. government-connected figurehead of the Uyghur separatist movement, showing that she promotes white supremacy and yellow peril. She told an Italian journalist that basically, unlike the Han Chinese, she uses similar body language as people in the West, has the more similar white skin, which she painted as clearly superior to yellow skin. So they're painting this as a problem with them being far more superior to the Chinese people, who have no right to rule over people who look like her. I then go on to say, so successful your China fear-mongering is that the consequences have spilled over for anyone who even remotely looks Chinese in America. It's getting far easier for you to eventually turn a blind eye when the genocide you've caused occurs. You really think you'll still care? BS. You're not talking about the violence towards Muslims in Kashmir, which we have real footage of, or the millions America killed, or the pardoning of American soldiers who shot kids through the head in Iraq. You don't even really care about Muslims. I shared a video, which I won't share here, it's too violent, of some Muslims being attacked by police in Kashmir. I then go on to say, so you sure as hell won't care what happens in Xinjiang after the terrorists you propped up start persecuting non-Uyghurs and or non-Muslim Uyghurs, because the non-Uyghur Muslims were targeted before when terrorism was going on. Maybe once in a while you'll say, hey, remember we used to always talk about that Xinjiang place? Whatever happened to them? Sounds far-fetched? That's probably because you really believe you're an independent thinking person who cares about the Uyghurs, not just because you've been told to, but just because you're a really, really nice person. Just like when you cared about Libya until you didn't. And then I showed the chart of the interest in Libyan human rights spiking just up until NATO invaded, and then afterwards, mission accomplished. Nobody gave a crap about them anymore. And I said, but hey, maybe it's just pure coincidence that despite you leaving Libya worse off than where it started after you liberated them, you stopped caring about them the same time that you accomplished your geopolitical goals. It's just you're busy. We know. I'm sure that's the problem. And obviously I showed pictures of Africans being traded in open slave markets now. This used to be one of the richest countries in Africa, free healthcare, free school, pretty serious social programs. I'm sure it was not without its issue. This is not a country that didn't have its issues, but without a doubt, absolutely 100% unconditionally. It has been destroyed now and nobody cares. Continue. And yet again, in true Western liberation style, no evidence can be found to support the claims used to excuse the aggression in the first place. And to be frank, you don't even really give a shit. Who the hell are there? Who the hell are they to demand you justify themselves, eh? You know, after all, they're just Muslims, right? Let's stop pretending you care about them. And then I share a video of Gaddafi's spokesperson, old spokesperson, answering questions about all of the charges that were made against his government. I'm not going to play that for you now. It's a little bit longer. It's a 4-minute plus video. I will play it at the end of the video. I still think it's very useful for you guys to watch and understand that there's no accountability for whatever claims that you make up. There's no saying, hold on a second, were we lied to again? You know, we don't have the same. We had more reconciliation after the weapons of mass destruction to understand that, yeah, you know, okay, we were had. But there's a bunch of other stuff like this where you don't have that period of reflection afterwards. So then I go into actually the WMD story. I said, but hey, maybe before the real genocide begins that you set up, you can do some stand-up comedy bits like this and say, nope, no genocide under there. How about under here? You guys are so cute that it makes up for all the Iraqi children you've killed. So I shared a disgusting video from George Bush laughing about the fact that there really weren't any weapons of mass destruction. I retweeted it on a thread, which is very graphic. I can share it with you guys if you want, but warning, it is very graphic, of somebody from, I believe they were from Iraq, sharing all of the stories and atrocities of, you know, the fact that 1 million innocent Iraqi civilians were killed, 3.3 million Iraqi civilians were displaced, and over 4 million children became orphans due to the occupation and the civil war's violence. And with all of that in mind, obviously it was a build-up at this point. This is what George Bush did. This is what George Bush had to say about it. I'm going to play the video for you.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
Absolutely disgusting. An absolute war criminal who's now, you know, hanging out with Bono and hanging out on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and you know, he's just so cute. You guys just have no ability to reconcile what you guys did, and so many of these anti-China guys, they're still talking about Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong is dead. No matter what you want to say about him, or no matter what you want to hold him accountable for, why are you talking about Mao Zedong when you could be talking about George Bush, who's a war criminal? You can talk about Obama, who's a war criminal, who created that mess in Libya. You still want to talk about shit that happened half a century ago? I gotta calm down here. But you know what? My last post has a little bit of emotion in it too. So my last post in this thread was, excuse me for saying, this is kind of why we don't give a fuck when you just belittle us with moronic CCP shill titles. Because it's more than obvious that you guys, with your awesome liberation operations success rates, whether willingly or not, are the real Nazis of today. You know, some of you guys have no idea what you're getting into by defending and cheerleading this effort that's going on. But you sure as hell have enough information to tell you that you've got it wrong enough times to maybe rethink this whole liberating the world task you've taken on. You're not very good at it. And you found out over and over again that these efforts are built on selfish and dishonest premises. I have an upcoming panel with a group called Pivot to Peace, in which I'll expand a little bit more on some of these topics I spoke about today in a far more calm manner. Yeah, let's bring it down. Let's bring it down a few levels. It'll air on Saturday, June 12th at 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time, 3 a.m. China time. The recording will be available afterwards as well, so don't worry if you can't make it during the initial screening. But I hope you guys get to see it one way or another. Kenneth Hammond will be there, which I'm pretty excited about. I've never met him before, but he's a brilliant scholar with an amazing backstory, and I've listened to his entire Yao to Mao Chinese history course, which I highly recommend to anyone interested in Chinese history. So I'm really looking forward to that. And anyways, take care. And one way or another, I'll see you next time. Peace.
Mainstream media around the world called you a liar, a mouthpiece for a regime that, far from this war being about imperialism, this was a regime that was organizing mass rape as a policy, using Viagra and other chemicals to complete mass rape policies, the massacring of unarmed protesters, and you were basically a mouthpiece for air bombardment of civilians.
Well, in any position you take, there are two powers. If you have on your side, then you are proven as an honest party. The power of explanation and the power of prophecy. And we had both. After 8 years, everything we said to explain what was happening in Libya proved to be right. We talked about terrorism, extremism, tribal conflict, Western imperialist project in the country to rob Libya of its wealth.
But how does this excuse all these accusations?
And the power of prophecy, because we talked about what things would happen afterwards. The division of the country, the continuous conflict. And we have proven right on this front as well. As for the charges, which were three main charges, the air bombardment of Libyan cities, which was proven false almost immediately, and the international media had to admit, because they came to Libya, an air bombardment is not something you can hide. Secondly, the mass rape of 8,000 Libyan women. The country has been under control of our enemies and the West for 8 years. Where are the victims, and where are the convictions, and where are the trials? After 8 years, they haven't been able to prove any systemic rape of women during that time. And then you have the charge of killing 10,000 innocent protesters in the first 3 days. Where are the names? Where are the bodies? At the most, they have been able to come up with 25 people who were killed in the first few days. We say they were armed. Some people say they were not armed. But 25 people killed is not 10,000. Libya was one of the richest countries in Africa. Libya has been under the attack of the West for 8 years. It's supposed to be a democracy now, a happy country helped and saved by the West. Look at Libya now. Killing, civil conflict, tribal war, murder, terrorism, robbing of national wealth. What does that remind you of Afshin? Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen. It's the same story happening every time. And some people still don't see it. For me, this is absurd. The truth is out there. And it really pains me that people choose their hatred against someone like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein over the truth, over what is happening every single day for years and years and years. Gaddafi was very honest and transparent with us, people who worked closely with him. And he said this. He said to us, make no mistake, we are being punished for what we did, not just for Libya, but for what we did for Africa and many other developing countries. We are paying the price for supporting Nelson Mandela, for supporting the black race, for supporting real politics of revolution. Gaddafi was happy to fight until his death. He knew he had many ways out. He chose not to go out. He was offered ways out, even by African leaders who visited him during the war. But he said if he goes out, the very ideas he fought for will die. In his death, his ideas will live. And I believe the ideas and the principles and the projects he led will live on and will come back with such power in the future.